The Mets did something yesterday that I love. A tip of the chapeau to Steve Cohen, who got a leak out there that the Mets would be interested in trading for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to play first base. God bless you, New York Mets. You think Scott Boras read that? You think Pete Alonso read it? Pete called up Scott and said, dude, Scott, what are we doing? They're going to trade for Guerrero, and all of a sudden, they're not going to need a first baseman. Then what am I going to do? Then all of a sudden, I'm going to a different team, but no other teams are giving me what I want. So we have to settle on a crappy deal with a new team, and everyone's going to know that no one wanted me and that my worth was overstated. What do we do here, Scott? Scott would say, Pete, calm down. The Blue Jays are not trading Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to the New York Mets. It's never going to happen. But it doesn't matter, Scott, Pete would say, whether that trade happens or not. The Mets are threatening to move on. Your guy, John Heyman, himself wrote an article about how the Mets could move on to Tanner Scott, build their bullpen, maybe sign Santander, the 40 home run guy who also has an overinflated sense of worth after a Brady Anderson season. Nah, that's being too harsh. I don't mean to be that harsh. If you don't know what a Brady Anderson season is, then Google it. Look up Brady Anderson 50 home runs, and there's a picture of a big, fat, 3-inch needle right next to it, I assume. God, it's so easy to be tricked when you are a baseball executive. So easy to take recency bias and parlay that into an overpay to a player. My God, look at that season he just had. He's on his way. This is just the beginning. Always, we talked about Brady Anderson in our baseball room when we were making deals and signings, and we would use it as a verb. He's a verb now. Don't get Brady'd. That means that don't get too excited about one season, which is an outlier, and think that that's going to become the norm and not the exception. You look at trends. The Mets have looked at Pete Alonso and said at 30 years old, we do not see a value with him for 9 years. I told you this on the show. They can't sign him to a long-term deal that he wants because he's going to end up being a DH, and the Mets already signed a DH for the next 15 years. There is no scenario where Pete Alonso and Juan Soto can be on the Mets 7 years from now, 6 years from now, 5 years from now. There is no scenario. So the Mets have, in a smart way, offered a short-term deal, and Alonso's told them to pound sand because Scott Boras said, forget it. We'll wait. Someone's going to come up with 6 guaranteed, Pete. You're going to get 180 over 6. I know we're thinking that we told people 200, but if we get you 180 over 6, you're going to love me. You're going to love me forever. Love me for a long time. But it's not out there. How do I think this ends? Vladimir Guerrero Jr. will not be traded to the Mets in 2025. At any time in 2025, even when the Blue Jays stink at the deadline and the Mets are looking for another bat, Vladimir Jr. will not be traded to the Mets in 2025. Wait to see.